So it's the summer of 1967, late June, if I remember the month right and the time. I'd been out getting the first crop haying done and at least worked on, and came in that evening. No, it was actually during the lunch, as I think is when I heard it, if my memory serves me right, which means my mother would have waved the white rag or flashed us with a mirror to get us to come in for lunch, because that's how she always did it when we were working over in the fields. And so we came in and we were sitting around the lunch table, because that's the way we did it too. We didn't grab our plate and go off and sit in the chair and watch TV or something. We sat around the dinner table and we said the blessing on the food, and we'd eat. Well, anyway, in 1967, on that particular day, something significant had happened that came up as a news item during our lunch. And that was that the night before, the school boards had met. And I say school boards because in the valley where I live, the Bear Lake Valley, there were two separate, I shouldn't say two school boards. There was only one school board, but there were two high schools. And the school board had met and finally made a decision that had been fought off for years and years and years, and that was to consolidate the two high schools. Now, I don't know if you've ever lived in an area where that topic ever became an issue or not, but in our little valley, these two high schools were about 8 miles apart, 8 or 9 miles. And the topic had come up a lot of different times about whether or not they should have just one school rather than two and make it more cost effective and yada, yada, yada. You know how it goes. Anyway, it was a done deal, according to the news we received that day while we were eating lunch. And it caught my interest because I was just finishing I had finished my junior year in high school at what they called Fielding High School. It was in Paris. And it was to be joined into what they called Montpelier High School, which was in Montpelier, Idaho, in the same valley. And they had made the decision that they would join. It turned out that the name of the new school would be called, and I can't remember whether they decided it that night or whether it came up later, but they called the new school Bear Lake High School. The reason it perked my interest is because I was involved in sports at my school there at Fielding, and I didn't know how all that would play out. You know, if they had two basketball teams and then they consolidated them, there's only one, or two football teams and now there was only one, or whatever. And the whatever in my case was that I had decided to run for a student body president at my school, and I had won the election. Now I say I had won the election. You think I'm a politician, I'm not, but I had some good counsel. Part of the good counsel I received when I decided to throw my hat in the ring for the student body president was to get somebody that was an artist in our school. His name was Brent, and have him do the artistic work. And my sister actually mentioned that to me, and she said, I think he could help your campaign if you'd get him involved. So I took that as a pretty good advice, and I asked him. I didn't even ask him who he was going to vote for. I just said, "Will you help my campaign?" He probably voted for the other person. I don't know. But that, but to his credit, he did a wonderful job for my campaign, and his artwork, I think, paid off for some of my posters, and I got creative, and I still remember my campaign slogan. It was "Innovation with Eborn," and anyway, long story short, it worked. And I was to be the student body president the following year. Well, guess what? Now with consolidated schools, there were 2 student body presidents that had been elected. So my thought was, well, I wonder which one of us is going to be the student body president of the new school. Like the basketball team and the football team. I wondered which one they'd pick, and couldn't figure out how they'd make that decision. I thought maybe I'd have to start campaigning to the school board members or anyway, over the radio airwaves or something. But as it turns out, that's not what they did at all. They ended up having co-student body presidents and co-vice presidents, co-secretaries, co-treasurers, co-everything. Co-class officers. That's just how they did it. And that was a good thing. Before I get too far into that, though, let me tell you that this consolidation thing probably wasn't all that bad of an idea, because I can remember when I was a little younger in the high school scene, like a freshman, or even before I got to high school, I'd heard some stories, and they weren't that good of stories about the rivalry between the 2 schools. And I can remember even in my freshman year, the principal calling us all in, ringing the bell, and said, "Everybody show up at the auditorium. I've got something I've got to talk to you about." And we went in there, and lo and behold, on the week when we were to play the other school for football, somebody had gone over and painted one of the buildings over there with paint with our high school initials and anyway, or mascot. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but I know it had the principal really concerned, and he laid down the law to us and told us that we'd cancel the game unless somebody came forward and said that they'd done it. So right there and then he said, "This game won't be played. It's done. Unless somebody shows up in my office and confesses." That's a pretty dramatic way of putting it. And sure enough, somebody showed up and they confessed, and the game went on. While I'm telling the story, I have to say one other time that exact same program worked. Because I might have been a sophomore this time. Anyway, I was sitting in a math class upstairs in the school, and all of a sudden there's this kaboom. And they talk about kids being wild these days. Somebody had lit a cherry bomb, and they won't even sell those in the fireworks trucks anymore because they're too dangerous. They're about the size of maybe just a little smaller than a golf ball, and they're red colored. Therefore, they called them cherry bombs, and you'd light them, and they'd really make a bang, and they'd even go off underwater. I found we had some muskrats in a pond that we had next to where we walked by to go to school. I can remember we'd throw muskrats out in the water not muskrats, we'd throw cherry bombs out in the water by the muskrats. And somehow the fuse kept burning even if they were underwater, because we'd throw it out there, and all of a sudden there'd be this kaboom in the water, and the water would blow up. And sometimes the muskrat would blow up. and I never got too involved in that, but I watched others. They had another one called an M80 that was even bigger. I don't know if they trusted us back in those days. Now you can't buy those kinds of fireworks. But that's not either here nor there, other than it blew up in this garbage can, and the principal said, once again on the microphone, I want all the boys. I guess he figured that girls would never do something like that, and I don't think they would. I want all the boys in the auditorium right now. And he did the exact same thing. He said, I'm telling you right now, this whole athletic season is done. Canceled as of right now, unless somebody shows up in my office by 3 o'clock this afternoon and tells me that they were the ones that did this, that threw this, put this cherry bomb in the garbage can. And sure enough, it worked. He got a confession, and the athletic season got put back on for the whole year. Otherwise, I think it would have got canceled, and he had us all convinced. Anyway, so there were rivalries back in those days, and like I said, they'd do something to the football field. Wasn't just us; it was the other school. When we had basketball games or whatever, there was some sort of malicious activity that would go on at the other school, the home school where it was being played, and it got kind of nasty. And I wasn't involved in any of these, but I heard of rumbles. You know how you'd have rumbles and gangs and all that kind of thing, and they'd sometimes get in fights and have. You'd hear all kinds of stories, but drag races and different things. I don't know. A lot of it probably wasn't true. But the bottom line is, I don't think that's why they consolidated. I think they consolidated the schools so that they could save money and keep things functional and plow ahead maybe better. But it caused a lot of controversy. And because I was in the student body leadership now, co-student body president, I was involved in all this, and we had to do a lot. As we found out as I went through the summer, I got calls, and we had to have meetings and figure out how we were going to do things starting out the new school year. You know, what colors we were going to choose, and who would determine what the colors were. It turned out that we took the colors from one school and the mascot from the other one, and anyway, we figured out how to kind of make it work. Some of the coaches I can remember still were a little bit upset at us because they'd bent our ears and wanted us to get new colors altogether, like lime green football uniforms or something. And we tried, but we couldn't pull it off. They weren't going to go for that because they were trying to save money, not spend more. So that's how they did it. But there were other things. There are things like the school song and the school constitution, and all kinds of different issues that we had to get involved with, and we had to come up with, like there'd be a fight song, and then there'd be the school song, and we had to get people. I remember we ended up rounding up, or ended up pawning some of it off onto what they call the Lions Club trio. I forget all their names. I could name some of them, but I won't. And they said, yeah, they'd work together and see if they come up with some words for a school song and a fight song and different things. And we had constitution meetings and decided, okay, we're not going to just use one of the other schools' constitution. We're going to make up something new as much as we can and make it work. And so there were a lot of meetings. Well, we got a lot of it done before school ever started. But when school got underway, a lot of it still hadn't been done, and the Constitution still had to be worked on, and there were issues that came up, like some of the students would look and they'd say, "Hey, we were going to use this color, and now we've got, some of the colors from the other school intruding into what we thought were our school colors that were different." And there's just a lot of those kinds of issues that came up, and there was always new bus schedules and routines and all of that they ask our input on. And to their credit, I give them credit for taking our input. I'm not sure how much of it they actually weighed, but I think they weighed a reasonable portion of our input. Felt like I wasn't just spinning my wheels. And those early morning meetings were about an hour before the bus showed up, which meant that I had to get my share of the chores done earlier on those days we had meetings, and I had to take the car, and I had to drive over to school 6-7 miles from my house and hold those meetings and then go to school and then come home. Well, it gets kind of interesting here because you might not believe this, but it's true. And I've thought about it a lot of times since, but there were 3 different times in the year that I drove my car. I shouldn't say my car, it was my parents' car, over to school, to those early morning meetings. And then we'd go to class. We'd deal with whatever we had to in the meeting, and we never quite got done all the time. And then we'd go to class, and then after class, there was the athletic practices and different things: football practice, basketball practice, track practice, depending on what time of the year it was. Most of it was football and basketball, because as the year went along, we got most of the work done. But 3 different times that year, oh my, I drove my car over to school and then forgot it and took the bus home. Now, okay, so now I'm 17, graduating into 18 years old. And you might not think that that's even possible for somebody that new behind the wheel to actually forget that they had a wheel to drive. And because most people think, well, gosh, that'd be fun, get behind the wheel. You're just a young driver and gets a chance to do that. Are you serious? You actually rode the bus home? Well, yeah, times 3. It was usually the same scenario. I'd get off the bus, and I had about a quarter of a mile after I got off the bus to walk home. And I can remember walking home and my mom looking outside and seeing that there's no car. She would say, "Well, where's the car?" And I'd bang my fist against my head and just in disgust and like, "Oh, no, I left the car over at school. I forgot it." Well, so we have to get in the truck and drive the truck over to get the car and bring it home. Times 3. So it's actually paid off to be a good thing, because now that I'm actually getting old and should be forgetting things, and people will quite often say to me, especially my kids, because they're ruthless, they say, "You're getting old, Grandpa, your dad. You're getting old. You're starting to forget things." And I'd have to tell them this story about me leaving my car at the high school, forgetting it to bring it home when I was 17 and 18 years old. It's got nothing to do with age. It's just that I forgot it. And just so now it becomes my defense. I'm saying, look, it's not because I'm getting old. I just forget things. Back off. Cut me some slack. I used to do it when I was 18 years old, for heaven's sakes. And I not only did it, I did it and did it and did it. So, and when I was off to school that first year, I had a professor who taught one of the best classes I've ever had, and it's a class that they should teach in all of the schools, I think, right up front, along with financial literacy and some of those that they don't teach. And it was a class on logic. I can't remember all of the logic names, but they would teach the fallacies in people's logic as they thought, where their logic fell apart. And the only one that I can remember was this. I'm going to say it because the reason I can remember it is because it's fun to say. You're going to want to say it over and over again once you hear it. Okay, here it is. It's an Italian term, and this is the Italian term. And it is Propter hoc, ergo no, I messed it up. Gotta say it again. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc. Now say that 2 or 3 times. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc. Well, you can bet I got that one right on the test because it was fun to say. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc. A fallacy in logic. And what it means in Italian is after this, or after the fact, therefore, because of the fact. And that's a fallacy. Just because something comes after something doesn't mean that it was caused by whatever it comes after. Because if it did that, then think about it. Think about where the logic falls apart here. The sun comes up after the rooster crows, right? So if we really believe in, or if we really don't think that's a logic error, then we would have to say, well, it's the rooster crowing that makes the sun come up. You see the logic problem? Well, I'm going to apply that same thing to aging. It's because you're old that you forget. No, I was forgetting when I was 18 years old. What are you talking about? I left my car at school, come home on the bus, over and over and over. And so anyway, you say it again, post hoc, ergo propter hoc. But we really do use that as an error in our logic with that particular phrase, that logic. We think that because Michael Jordan likes a hamburger, because he likes them, we should all like them. Therefore, if he likes them, we'll like them. If somebody else does something and it works, then we think it's because they did it a certain way, and that's the reason that it works. We think that if we eat 3 eggs in the morning and it makes us stay awake longer in the day, we think it's the 3 eggs that made us stay awake. It's the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy in play. And I've noticed, I'm glad it was fun to say, otherwise I wouldn't have remembered it nearly as well, but I've noticed it play out over and over and over again in the way people think. And so it's kind of fun when I walk up to somebody and say, well, you'd be right, except for Prost hoc, ergo propter hoc. And they look at me like, what kind of a goofus are you anyway? What does that mean? So I just tell them. I use it for a little teaching moment and say that just because something comes after the fact doesn't necessarily mean that it was because of the fact. And sometimes you can get out of trouble doing that too, because like if you come in from the raspberry bushes and your fingers are all red, and your mom assumes that because your fingers are red and you'd been out in the raspberry patch that you'd been picking and eating the raspberries when maybe you weren't supposed to. And I'd say, well, no, post hoc, ergo propter hoc. Just because I came in from the raspberry patch with red fingers doesn't mean it was the raspberries that caused the red fingers. And so then, if you want to, you're not lying, you can use that for a justification for whatever case you want to make for yourself. Well, anyway, so consolidation year was a trial year. I made some good friends, went through some trials, had to exercise some leadership. I remember one time our new principal came in to the student council meeting and he said, we have a problem. Our school's getting junked up. We have candy wrappers and all these things all over the school. People don't pick up after themselves, and it looks like a trash can wherever we walk. And we want you guys, you student body presidents, student council, we want you to figure out how to fix it because we're getting tired of it. That's kind of the way they said it. And so I can still remember. Now, keep in mind, we had advisors that kind of lead us along. But we ended up calling a student body meeting inside the auditorium this time. And the other student body president, again, I won't use names in these because they might go public, but the other student body president and myself, we stood up in front of the microphone and tried to make the case to the students, our fellow students, that they ought to clean up after themselves. If they want to keep their privileges, they're better clean up. And I remember thinking it's a little uncomfortable sitting up there talking to your peers, especially when you're one of the guilty parties, and trying to get them to clean up after themselves in the halls and the cafeterias, and better because they're slobs. when you're a little bit of a slob yourself. And anyway, that's a trial of leadership that maybe some of you won't understand until you've experienced it. Anyway, just because I'm old doesn't mean that that's why I forget things. And who knows, maybe it's not just because I'm old that a lot of other things happen. I keep telling myself that. There's this song that comes on the radio. I wish I'd have thought I actually played TV. You can look it up. I think Willie Nelson sings it. I forgot who else. But it's Don't Let the Old Man In. Google that one up, or you YouTube it, or whatever you need to, and so on your music stations and play it. It's called "Don't Let the Old Man In." The thrust of the song, and I end up playing that. That's one of my favorite songs now, because the thrust is that just because you're old doesn't mean you have to let the old man inside you. You can stay young and be old. It's not necessarily a case that one has to follow the other. You can still act young and be old. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc, remember? Okay, Got to break that logic apart. Anyway, there's a line in there that says, ask yourself how old you would be if you didn't know the day you were born. And sometimes I think of that. How old would I be if I didn't know the day I was born? And I need to do better. But I'm just rambling away here and letting you know of some thoughts I've had relative to things that have happened in years gone by. And of course, I want you to go around now saying, post hoc ergo propter hoc. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. So you can even get a rhythm to it. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. There's all kinds of ways you can say it. And it just means that just because after the fact doesn't mean because of the fact. There. You've had a little lesson on logic just by tuning in to the MTC. Me, thee, and charity. And now we will call it a night. Good night.